One thing to remember about Tim Draper is he was the first to cut her a check when she dropped out of Stanford. And the reason he did is there was actually a relationship between the families. Elizabeth and her family had lived next door to the Drapers in Woodside, California.
In a weird way, I can almost forgive him because of that. Go, okay, you know what? It was your kid's friend. But what about everybody else? I mean, all along, there were, I guess, not signs, but even when the articles started coming out, people kind of didn't want to believe. They had George Shultz on the board. His grandson had to cause a family rift by blowing the whistle on what was happening there.
Right. Well, I mean, I want to come back to Draper for a second. It's understandable that he would be reflexively defensive because Elizabeth was his daughter's friend, and then he was one of the early funders. But now that you've had SEC charges that detail exactly all the elements of the fraud, still defending her is really hard to understand. And I think in this case, Draper just does not want to admit that he's wrong. He's letting his ego get in the way of his judgment.
Is that true for Elizabeth Holmes herself? What is the mentality now? Because as I understand it, the SEC has charged this as a fraud. I believe she cannot participate in the industry, but she's still CEO. In fact, just a couple weeks ago was trying to raise more money.
Right. Although my understanding, according to sources who've interacted with her recently, is that she's accepted that Theranos is circling the drain and it's going to be liquidated within a month or two. The other thing, by the way, that bears watching is that the SEC's investigation wasn't the only investigation that was happening. There's been another parallel investigation going on for more than 2 years by the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco. My sources tell me that investigation is drawing to a close, and it very well may result in criminal indictments of Elizabeth Holmes and her ex-boyfriend, Sunny Balwani.
Wow.
One of the explanations for how this all happened, so many people believing, is that they wanted to believe that there was some technology that was possible in this area. Was there ever a kernel of anything there in terms of a potential competitive advantage?
Well, there were really 3 iterations of the technology. I mean, 4 if you count the original idea, which was this futuristic patch that was going to both diagnose you and cure you simultaneously. I mean, that was basically science fiction. Then she pivoted to an attempt at a microfluidic device. And after a couple years of banging their heads against the wall, she and her engineers, they abandoned that in 2007 and pivoted to what was essentially a converted glue dispensing robot. One of the engineers ordered a robot from a glue dispensing robot maker in New Jersey called Fiznar, and then figured out how to make its components smaller. And that was the innards of what became known as the Edison. And then the 3rd iteration of the technology was the Mini Lab. And the Mini Lab, when she went live with the blood tests in 2013, as I explained in my book, was a malfunctioning prototype that was in no way, shape, or form ready to be deployed on patients. So what she and Sunny, her boyfriend, did is they dusted off the Edison, which was a limited machine that could only do 1 class of blood tests and didn't do those tests well. And then for the majority of tests on their menu, they did them with commercial analyzers.
And as this all was going on, the employees, as some made it clear, started to realize, look, this is not what we're selling people a bad bill of goods. And what have the interviews that you've conducted been like? I mean, did people feel really conflicted about how and whether to speak up? Did they feel a lot of pressure to try to help make this, frankly, fraud, as the SEC's now called it, work? How?
Right. Well, there was tremendous pressure on my sources before my first story was published, and it continued, in fact, for several months afterwards, because the company let it be known always that it wasn't afraid to sue ex-employees or current employees. Elizabeth had sued early employees, and so there was that precedent. And then there was David Boies as the outside counsel of the company, and he acted as sort of a scarecrow, and he gave credence to those litigation threats. And so the whistleblowers who spoke to me did so at great personal risk.
The other thing too that mentioning David Boies reminds me of, Mike, and it's emblematic. This board was star-studded. Everybody associated with this company was a huge name, and I don't know if that's one of the main lessons people should take from this.
Well, I do think they took advantage of the fact that, first of all, amazing stuff's happening in Silicon Valley. It's kind of who you know.
Right.
And if somebody decided, like a Tim Draper, that I'm going to be the anchor investor in this thing, who knows, this brilliant kid might have something. It just gathers up money and prestige.
We've seen Stanford dropouts do it before.
Whether it's worthy of it or not. Right?
One of her strategies was always to surround herself and win the backing of someone who had credibility and someone who had a prestigious reputation. So Draper and Channing Robertson, her Stanford Engineering School professor, were the first. Then Donald Lucas, who helped groom Larry Ellison, and then George Shultz. And Shultz came along in 2011 and joined her board, and then introduced her to all his buddies at the Hoover Institution, the think tank on the Stanford campus. And that's how she came to have Henry Kissinger and Bill Perry and all these other aging, former statesmen who were sort of larger than life figures on her board.
And so I read that Jennifer Lawrence is going to play her in a movie. Is that true?
There's
going to be a movie version,
right.
and who's going to play you?
I don't know. I mean, I've been joking that I'd like it to be the actor who plays Thor.
I think that's a perfect fit, John. I don't know why that would be a problem.
Our biceps are, similar diameters.
Yeah.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.